when should I be thinking about hiring my first employee? And like, how will I know? And it's really exciting when we meet individuals and kind of this is the stage that they're at in their business, because we know, Joey, that it's exactly the right time for them to be talking to us early on versus maybe when they've hired a few employees or more contractors, and then we meet up with them and kind of have to back up the train a little bit and kind of do some course correction. So when you're talking to individuals on sales calls and they pose this question to you, what are some of your thoughts around, like, how do they know when it's time to hire?
Well, I feel like a lawyer when they're asking me this question, and because my first response is, well, it depends. And it really depends on the team that you have, the vision for your organization, and the responsibilities that you have individuals undertaking. Um, there's we'll drop a link to this in the show notes, but the IRS actually has a 3-point test of what makes a person an employee versus what makes them a contractor. And so it's things around, do you dictate their start hours? Do you dictate how they get their job done? What is the level of control that you exert or wish to exert over this person? Um, and then the other thing it depends on is, your budget. Are you able to bring on an individual that's W-2 and benefits and so on, or do you need to bring on sort of a contractor who there's a bit more flexibility in how they get their work done? So, oh, and then also we take a look at their location, because some areas, cough cough, California, uh, are even more stringent about contractor relationships or independent contractor relationships, and many contractors are seen as employees, and so you have to be conscious of that too. So I really just ask more questions than prescribe, because I want to get a feel for, well, where does this person want to go? And so if they're looking to streamline, like, or not streamline, if they're looking to own the way that the person works, and if they, that's really the main thing I look at. And so if that's the case, then it's like, well, let's have that conversation about W-2, because that's where it is. And while you're talking, Summer, I'm going to pull up those IRS guidelines and talk through them, because we just sent this out to somebody um, this week.
It is a very, very common question. So while you're pulling that up, I'll touch on some of the questions that I typically ask, because again, I'm hoping that for our listeners of the show, if maybe this is a question that they've had, they can kind of run through some of the questions that we ask and be thinking about them. But there is no, really very clear, like, yes or no answer to this. Like, yes, while the IRS and the various states may have their guidance and their criteria, when it comes to anything in regards to the law, it does require actually applying it, right? So it's like you just can't go through the check boxes and they're all yes or no. You add them up and there's a clear yes or no. And that's where we come in. And so some of the questions I ask small business owners are, where are you located, right? So that we can address the compliance needs for states that have specific criteria. What is the nature, like the main nature of your business? What is like, how many contractors do you currently have, and what is the nature of the work that they are doing? How many hours are they working? How long have they worked with you? These are all things that I'm asking to try to get a better sense of, are they performing core work? Like, that is the main, like, nature of the business. Are they receiving that control that you discussed, Joey? Like, is the business saying, hey, these are the outcomes we need, and not exerting much control over how and when the work is done? Or are they treating them more like an employee, like, hey, let's check in twice a week. I want updates on all of your stuff. I'm going to tell you what I expect for next steps. That's a different level of control that we know can be a very kind of touchy and or gray area for those contractors. So, those are just kind of some of the initial questions that we ask, because if we already know just going through those questions that the contractors really should be classified as employees, well, then the discussion changes, right? Because now we're having conversation, not so much how do you know when you should be hiring your first employee? It's really more of, okay, now is the time to convert this individual to an employee.
Yeah, and I pulled up the IRS rules, but I want to also make a comment too. This is less a HR thing than it is a business operations thing. Um, if you're in a position where you absolutely need employees, but you feel as though maybe it's cost prohibitive at the time, another thing to look at is your pricing and your pricing model. And maybe you're not charging enough, or maybe the way finances are allocated in your business, maybe more should be spent on labor and less on other categories. So that's another thing to think about too. Is maybe it's not just we can't afford people on as employees, but it's also like, do I need to raise my rate so that we can, because we absolutely need to. So that's something to take a look at. But back to the IRS common law rules, there are three things the IRS looks at to determine if an individual is an employee or a contractor. The first thing is the behavior of the individual. So does the company control or have the rights to control what the worker does and how the worker does his or her job? So, do you say you can only use this document? You can only ask these questions. You can only, use this form, or you can only do this, that, and the third. If you put a lot of guardrails around how someone does their job, that's check one for they might be a employee. Second thing is financial. Um, are the business aspects of the worker's job controlled by the payer? These things include things like how worker is paid, whether expenses are reimbursed, who provides tools, supplies, etc. So it's something like, do you set the rate that a person is paid, or does the independent contractor give you their rate? And it's stuff like that. And then the third one is type of relationship. Are there written contracts or employee type benefits, i.e., pension plan, insurance, vacation pay, etc.? Will the relationship continue, and is the work performed a key aspect of the business? So that one is something like, are you paying people time off? Uh, are they, HR is a little bit different because there was a court case in California about independent contractors versus employees, and there was a list of exempted roles. So HR is a little bit different for our company, but it brings to mind the whole, like, is a Uber driver an independent contractor or an employee? And back when we were having those discussions, so if a person is doing a key role of your business, and they're a contractor, and they're not on the exempted list, then you could have that third strike of, yes, they're an employee.
You bring up some really great points. And I know a number of episodes previously, we actually dove deeper into the classification or misclassification of contractors. And so if you're listening to this episode and you're thinking, gosh, I need to know more about this, then take a look at one of our earlier shows for a deeper dive. But I was hoping that we could close out kind of the last discussion for today's show to really finish answering the question about, how or, how do business owners know when they should hire their first employee, and just kind of share some of our closing thoughts.
Yeah. Sorry, I kind of went on a rabbit trail.
No, no, no. I think it's great information. But what are your thoughts on, you're a small business owner, you have a few contractors, and you're like, gosh, like, how do I plan for this? When do I know?
Yeah, I think you should be hiring employees when you're concerned about other people taking and using your company's IP after they leave your organization. That's one example. So if you, for example, have a certain way you run your business, it's one thing to tell an employee, "Hey, these are trade secrets. You can't replicate them if you were to go work for a competitor." It's another if you're telling that to a contractor because there isn't that relationship there. The other thing is if you, and I don't mean this in a bad way, I mean it in a good way actually. If you want to own the growth of your team, one of the challenges of having independent contractors is they can and have the right to only be as committed as their compensation allows. But if you're looking to do performance management, if you're looking to see growth and to develop your team, then you might want to look at an employee-employer relationship as opposed to contractor. And then the third thing is, if you're at a place where you're looking to replicate yourself or replicate other people in the organization and scale your business, it's a lot better to do that, I believe, with employees who are committed to the way that you want to run your business and the values that you have about your business, uh, than to bring on consultants who have the right to do the task the way that they want to do the task. So those are my conversations of when you're ready to hire employees.
Those are really good. And I love having these conversations because I think that we each have kind of a slightly different reasons or perspectives. And I don't think that any are wrong. I think that they're just additional considerations. And when I'm talking with small business owners, after we get past that initial kind of compliance piece, because oftentimes that in itself is like enough for them to know, okay, well, now is the time. Well, let's just say they are using contractors, and they are not misclassified, and it truly is a decision that they can make when they determine that they want to make it. One of the conversations that I love to have is about opportunity cost. And, I ask them, like, well, you're wearing all of these hats. Like, how much are you losing by not hiring someone? And, like, I see this giant, like, blank look on the faces of, like, gosh, I don't know. So then we'll start talking about, like, okay, based on the nature of their business, are you potentially missing out on pursuing leads? Are you maybe not following up on them as well as you should? Or are there projects that you're just not saying yes to because you're afraid that you don't have a either large enough team or committed enough team to take on some of these larger projects? And then you start kind of seeing the wheels spinning, right? To where they're like, gosh, yeah, that happens to me all the time. And so that's where, we really need to start thinking about investing in maybe even just one hire has the ability to take something off of the owner's plate so that they can pursue some of these opportunities. And if that's not enough, then, I start talking to them about, because we know this is the common issue with business owners, like, well, what other aspects of your family, your life, your relationships, and health are impacted because, maybe you're working 60, 70, 80 plus hours a week, and that's just not really sustainable to build a business. So, these are all definitely considerations to get somebody closer to, making that decision. And you touched a little bit, Joey, on the last aspect, which was kind of the financial component. And I think that that decision as to knowing when to hire an employee is usually when businesses have consistent income to cover their expenses, and or when they are stable enough to incur the debt, based on that business's kind of current trajectory.